warriors, welcome back to Self-Care Haven. Today I wanted to read out loud my article, 5 Damaging Lies That We Learn from Narcissistic Parents, and I know that a lot of you will resonate with this one. Lie number 1, your worth is always dependent on conditional circumstances. As the child of a narcissistic parent or parents, you were taught that you were not inherently worthy, but rather that your worth depended on what you could do for the narcissistic parent and how compliant you were. The emphasis on appearance, status, reputation is at an all-time high in households with a narcissistic parent. Due to the narcissistic parent's grandiosity, false mask, and need to be the best, you are probably part of a family that was presented in the best possible light, with abuse taking place behind closed doors. Now, we all know this family, right? You were probably part of the same family, the most well-respected, polished family with a great reputation. But no one knew that behind closed doors, you were being devalued and degraded as the scapegoated child of a narcissist, or even perhaps the golden child who lost the love of the narcissistic parent as soon as you failed to comply with their demands in adulthood or in reaching independence. Within the home was a different story than the one presented to the public. You may have witnessed the horrific dynamics of seeing one parent verbally or even physically abuse the other. Perhaps you were subjected to the abuse yourself and/or experienced both parents working together to undercut both you and your siblings. If you ever dared to threaten the perfect false image of the family or did anything to speak out about the abuse, you are most likely punished. The emotional and psychological battery children of narcissistic parents undergo when going against the expectations and beliefs of the family can be incredibly damaging and have lifelong effects on the child's self-image, agency, and faith in themselves. Children of narcissistic parents are taught they are not independent agents, but rather that they are objects that are here to serve the narcissistic parent's ego and selfish agendas. Lie number 2, you need to be perfect and successful, but you should never be rewarded for it or ever feel enough. Narcissists are masters of moving the goalposts so that nothing their victims do is ever enough. We talked about this in the 20 diversion tactics video, right? Moving the goalposts is one of their diversion tactics. To make you feel small, to make you feel constantly on edge, to make you feel like you're walking on eggshells, to make you vie for their attention and approval. As childhood abuse survivors, we are no exception to this rule. Our accomplishments are rarely acknowledged unless they meet an arbitrary criteria for what looks best to society or confirms the narcissistic parent's own grandiose fantasies. So this is the parent who dreams of becoming a beauty queen, and they enroll their young child, their impressionable young child, into toddlers and tiaras, into pageants at a very young age, sexualizing them at a very young age. These are the types of parents that push their children into careers that are not meant for them. They try to force and subjugate their children into the dreams that they wish they had fulfilled. Now, not all parents who do this are narcissistic. I believe that it's still a narcissistic act to undermine your child's goals and dreams and their authentic identity over time, but there are certain cultures where that's more rampant than others. So I'm not saying that all parents who do this are narcissistic, but what I am saying is that narcissistic parents do have that tendency to erode their children's accomplishments, their authentic identity, and their authentic dreams. What their children want and desire don't matter as much as what they themselves need their children to fulfill in order to look good to society. Our abusive parent is never genuinely proud of us unless he or she can claim credit for that particular success. So you might have witnessed this yourself as a child of a narcissistic parent. You know, they might degrade your accomplishments, but then as soon as somebody compliments your accomplishment in front of them, suddenly they're so proud of you, right? And it's because they can take credit for that success and they can feel good about themselves and bolster their own ego. So whenever it serves them, whenever it serves their self-image, they're able to congratulate and praise you in front of other people. But that doesn't mean that they're actually genuinely proud of you. They might actually even be envious of you, right? Some narcissistic parents can envy or look down upon the success of their children, especially if that success enables that child to become independent of their parents, outside of their realm of power and control. Very similar to how narcissists act in relationships, right? Or in friendships. If they see that you have something special within you that will enable you to become independent of their control and their power over you, and will enable you to have a high level of self-confidence, of self-validation, and self-esteem, and self-efficacy, and self-sufficiency, then they're going to try to destroy it because they want that power and control over you. It is not uncommon for these types of parents to attempt to sabotage the success and happiness of their children if that success interferes at all with their grandiose self-image, their own ideas of what happiness should entail, usually whatever makes them look good rather than what makes their children feel good, or their compulsion to micromanage and control every facet of their children's lives. So just like pathologically envious narcissists in relationships, narcissistic parents also seek to sabotage their children, especially if their success in any way threatens their sense of power and control over their children. In the sick mind of the narcissistic parent, it would be better if their children did not exist, rather than unable to do their bidding and perform the identity that the parent wishes their children to embody or achieves the exact goals that they want them to achieve. So you might have heard your narcissistic parent tell you mean, awful things like you should have never been born, or you know, what is the point of having a daughter or a son if he or she can't do this or that? Basically tying your worth as a human being to what you can do for them or what you have failed to do for them. And that is just vile, right? That is just vile, and it's a falsehood that they feed us, because our worth is not tied to what we can do for another person. Our worth is inherent, it's intrinsic, it's innate, it's always been within us ever since the day we were born, and we don't need to prove that to any narcissistic parent or partner or friend or family member or anybody else, because we already have that worth within us. Even if they were the perfect daughters or sons, the goalposts would again shift, and their level of perfection would still never be good enough in the eyes of the narcissistic parent. So just like a narcissistic partner or friend, they will never be satisfied. And this goes for narcissistic coworkers, bosses, and any other narcissist that you will meet in adulthood, right? Narcissistic parents are no different when it comes to this. They do not feel like their children will ever meet their expectations. Their expectations are so high, are so arbitrary, and they are constantly shifting and changing so much that their children will never meet their needs. Their children will never meet their expectations. So rather than trying to please the narcissistic parent, it's really advised that survivors of narcissistic abuse in childhood learn how to detach and grow independently from their parents in adulthood, whether that means going no contact with their abusive parents depending on the level of toxicity involved, or going low contact on only maintaining minimum contact in the event of illnesses or celebrations or family events, things like that, right? But it all depends on your level of toxicity in the relationship, as well as your ability to engage in self-care and set boundaries, because every situation is different, and some situations might be more toxic than others, and other situations might not warrant no contact to that extent, but they will still warrant a setting of boundaries, which might be still effective. The third lie is, there is always someone better, and you must beat them, starting with your own siblings. Children of narcissistic parents are often turned against their siblings in a competition to vie for the attention and love they always craved, but never received. Narcissistic parents are well known for triangulating children against one another as an attempt to unnecessarily compare them, demean them, and feed their own sense of power and control over the family unit. Usually there is a golden child and a scapegoat, and sometimes the roles are reversed, depending on what the narcissistic parent needs to meet their agenda. Scapegoated rebel children are often truth seekers who desire an authentic connection with their family members, but fail to remain silent about the abuse that occurs when they do not meet the absurd expectations of their parents. So if you know author Jeff Brown, he wrote about this recently on his Facebook page. He wrote this wonderful message which basically said, the person who the dysfunctional family calls insane, and I'm paraphrasing, is actually usually the sane one, right? The truth teller, the one who goes against the dysfunction and the toxicity. The rebel is often pathologized, is often told that they're the ones in the wrong, is often invalidated to the extent where they start to believe that they must be crazy to ever question the toxic status quo. And that is usually who becomes the scapegoat in the narcissistic family unit, right? The golden child, on the other hand, is usually lauded as the standard, right? The perfect child. But this too can quickly take a turn, right? Because every source of love and respect that a narcissistic parent shows you is always conditional, even if you're a golden child. And it can quickly take a turn should the golden child ever exercise his or her agency and do something outside of the narcissist's control. So whether that means, they decided to support the scapegoat in a situation, maybe they became independent financially from their parents, maybe they decided to escape the toxicity in some way or challenge the parent in some way, then they will also be punished too. We are taught at a very young age that we will never be good enough, that we must always compare ourselves to others and fail to acknowledge our inherent worthiness and value. As adults, we learn that we do not have to compete with anyone in order to be worthy or valuable, nor do we have to necessarily be the best at everything. So even though the golden children and the scapegoated children are turned against one another, that doesn't mean that we can't detach from this toxic comparison in adulthood, right? We can maintain healthy relationships with our siblings if they are not toxic or if they choose to detach from the toxicity too. It all depends, right? We don't have to follow in that toxic habit of comparing ourselves to others and constantly competing with others, because we don't have any competition, right? We are all unique, we are all special in our own ways, and we have to cultivate that sense of unconditional self-love as well as an appreciation of our unique skills and abilities, because this can go a long way in combating these harmful internalizations from abuse and replacing them with a healthy level of pride and self-sufficiency. Lie number 4. Contempt is a part of love and normal in a relationship. Narcissistic parents can subject their children to periods of idealization when they need them, quickly followed by contempt and terrifying narcissistic rage when they disobey and threaten their excessive sense of entitlement. The condescension, contempt, and hatred with which a narcissistic parent uses to berate their children is not only immensely harmful, it retrains the mind into accepting abuse and contempt as a new normal. This pattern of idealization and devaluation teaches us that love is unstable, frightening, and ultimately unpredictable. It causes us to walk on eggshells, fearful that we may displease others. It also desensitizes us and makes us tone deaf to verbal abuse later on in adulthood. Although we may learn to identify emotional and verbal abuse and see it for what it is, we will be less likely than someone who had a healthy upbringing to recognize how damaging it can be or how unacceptable it truly is. So on a logical level, on a rational level, we can theorize, we can talk about the fact that it's abuse, but subconsciously and emotionally, we may still accept it as normal, because it unfortunately is familiar to us as the only version of love we've ever been shown. We may become trauma bonded to our abusive parents in childhood and therefore more prone to bonding with abusive partners in adulthood as a result, because our first caretakers are the ones that we depended on, relied on for survival. So we had to, in a sense, trauma bond with them in order to survive. And we carry on that habit in adulthood when we cement that trauma bond and reinforce it with abusive partners that are very familiar and resemble the characteristics of those narcissistic parents. We may even go to the other end of the spectrum. So some survivors actually shut out anyone who resembles their parents in any way, tone, or attitude. Now, some of this may be hypervigilance, but much of it is actually self-protection and intuition about the behaviors that have traumatized them in the past. So this can have disadvantages and advantages, because sometimes it can go a little bit too far, and we can become so prone to shutting out everyone and not wanting to let anybody in because of our experiences. At the same time, this can also be an intuitive way that we can protect ourselves, because a lot of us are very deeply intuitive about what can harm us, because we had to be, right? We learned to be empaths in a sense, because we were always focused on micro expressions, body language, because we were always looking out for threat and danger in childhood, and that part of the brain that's going into that flight or fight mode is not going to be shut off in adulthood. It's going to keep going, and it's going to keep going when we encounter toxic partners that resemble our narcissistic parents. Children of narcissistic parents can resensitize themselves to the fact that abuse is not a normal or healthy part of any relationship by addressing their people-pleasing habits, doing important boundary work, and replacing old narratives of unworthiness with empowering ones about the type of love and respect they truly deserve. They can essentially reparent themselves in a safe, protective space. Lie number 5. Your emotions are not valid. Narcissistic parents, much like narcissistic abusers in adult relationships, pathologize and invalidate our emotions to the extent where we are left voiceless. We are not allowed to feel, so we end up going in extremes. We either become repressed and numb, or we become rebel children who feel too much too soon. Our emotions become overwhelming either way, because our grief is not processed in a healthy way, starting from childhood. In adulthood, we gain the opportunity to validate our own emotions and recognize that what we feel and have felt all along is entirely valid, whether as children or as adults. We learn how to process our emotions, our trauma, and the grief of being unloved as children and adolescents. We learn that we have opportunities to detach from our abusive parents, whether it be through low contact, minimum contact only when necessary, or no contact at all. We experiment with using our agency to separate ourselves from the identity erosion that occurred in our childhoods. We learn to separate the narcissistic parents' harmful beliefs about us and our own burgeoning faith. Most of all, we learned that it is okay to believe in ourselves and to welcome good things into our lives. We learn that we are deserving of all that is good and more. It is important to remember that as children of narcissistic parents, we carry the legacy of our wounds, but that these wounds can become portals to deeper and richer healing. We do not have to burden the next generation with our wounding, but rather use it as a way to nurture and validate for future generations. We have options as to how we can channel these traumas for our own growth rather than our self-destruction. These wounds cannot heal if they are not addressed, or if we refuse to be awake to them, or if we refuse to be aware. At the same time, our timeline for healing will be unique, and our journey cannot be compared to that of other survivors. Self-awareness and self-compassion is needed more than ever. As children of narcissistic parents, we have to learn to protect ourselves from further abuse and set up a plan to better engage in self-care. The falsehoods about parents always being loving and having our best interests at heart simply do not cut it when it comes to manipulative, toxic, and abusive parents like these. These parents are incapable of empathy and are likely to hoover you back only when they need to use you as a source of supply. We must allow ourselves to grieve for the loss of our childhood and embrace the truth that our parents may have never loved us or wanted the best for us, but that we can reparent ourselves the best ways we know how, through empathy, compassion, self-acceptance, self-respect, and self-love. Make no mistake, when you are the child of a narcissistic parent, the idea that you never deserved this love is perhaps the biggest lie of all. So I hope you enjoyed this article. I'm going to leave a link in the description box below to the Huffington Post article that I just read out loud. Again, it's called 5 Damaging Lies That We Learn from Narcissistic Parents. And I hope that it's been validating to you as a childhood abuse survivor or as someone who is curious about narcissistic abuse on all levels, both in childhood and adulthood. And I invite you to share your stories with me below in the comments section. Let me know which one of the lies you most identified with and what is the truth that you've replaced it with. I look forward to hearing your insights, and I'll talk to you soon. Until next time, take care.